Some of the views expressed on the Mormon Channel are solely for the education and inspiration of our audience and may not represent the official position of the Church.
I'm Nathan Wright, and you're listening to the Mormon Channel of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. Initially, settlements in southern Alberta, Canada, by Latter-day Saints were seen as temporary, a refuge from the harsh U.S. laws against polygamy. But settle they did, and there's been a strong Latter-day Saint presence there since the late 1880s. And here to talk about those Latter-day Saint settlements are historians Gary Boatwright, Sister Sandra Petrie, and Brady Winslow. Welcome to Legacy, all of you.
Thank you.
Please, if you would, take a minute and introduce yourself to our listeners. Gary, let's start with you.
Well, I'm Gary Boatwright. I am a historic sites curator for the Church History Department, and I've been working on a couple of projects with southern Alberta the last few years. So I've gotten to know the history rather intimately and the people up there, and it's been a wonderful thing to work on.
Excellent. Brady?
The last year I spent interning with the Historic Sites Division of the Church History Department, so working close with Gary and getting to know the history of southern Alberta as well, and I'm currently working with the Joseph Smith Papers Project.
Excellent. Sister Petrie?
Well, I'm a full-time missionary with a background in Mormon women's studies, assigned to historic sites, and had an opportunity to learn a little bit about sign a card.
Excellent, who we'll be talking about during this episode. So let's find out why Latter-day Saints went to southern Alberta.
Well, as you pointed out, in 1882, Congress, they passed the Edmunds Act, which basically outlawed polygamy. And so a lot of church leaders were being prosecuted for practicing polygamy, and this included Charles Card. He was the stake president up in Cache Valley in northern Utah. And he in fact, he was arrested one time. He escaped by jumping from a moving train.
Wow.
And that's a fun story in and of itself.
We'll have to make a movie about that.
But to help church leaders avoid prosecution, the church established a number of settlements in northern Mexico. And so leaders went down there and settled. And Charles Card, knowing about the settlements in Mexico, he wrote to the president of the church, John Taylor, and asked if he should go down to the settlements in Mexico. And the response from John Taylor that he got, I think, was a little unexpected. John Taylor told him not to go south, but to go north to Canada. And as we know, John Taylor himself was from Canada. He was converted to the church in Toronto. And so in response to President Taylor's encouragement, Charles Card left Utah and went on essentially a scouting mission in the fall of 1886 to southern Alberta. He went first up to British Columbia, and then he turned east into Alberta. And between October 22nd of 1886 and the 24th of that month, they surveyed the area, which would eventually be the place they would settle. And Card, he wrote that it was a fine district of country and an excellent place to form a settlement or settlements. And so I think Card saw the vision of this place and this territory of not just having one settlement, but a number of settlements. And so on the 24th of October of that year, Charles Card dedicated the land as a settlement for Latter-day Saints. Well, with the site selected, Card came back to Cache Valley, began to recruit a number of families to go up there with them the next year. And on March 25th of 1887, 8 families, including many of the Cards, traveled north. And it took them a couple of months to get up there, but they reached the border, the Canadian border, on June 1st, 1887. And when they crossed the border, they celebrated. In fact, Card wrote in his journal, he said that the company bursted out saying, "Hurrah for Canada, 3 cheers for Canada." And they were excited because now, they were free from the prosecution that was plaguing many members of the church in Utah at that time. So a couple days later, they finally reached the site which Charles Card had dedicated. And just like many other Latter-day Saint settlements, within a matter of days, they went to work plowing, surveying, and establishing a community in the area.
So the saints who went to northern Mexico, I believe, if I remember right, the government said, as long as you're good citizens, you can practice polygamy if you want. What was the reaction to polygamy in Canada?
There was some mixed reaction. The community just northeast of what is now Cardston, called Lethbridge, there was quite a bit of concern of citizens in Lethbridge of these polygamous practicing Mormons coming into their area. But I think they were far enough away, and they really kept to themselves, that it was kind of a, if they don't bug us, we won't bug them type of mentality.
Gary, I think I remember reading that the Canadian government said that they could come as long as they only brought one wife. Is that right?
I believe that's right.
They could be polygamous, but not actually having plural families in Canada, if I recall.
Where was Charles Card from, and what skills qualified him to be a founder of a settlement? Do we know anything about his history?
Well, he went to Canada from Logan, Utah, and he was young. He joined the church when he was in his teens, and he went to Logan to build a home for his parents. And he was, before he went to Canada, responsible for the construction of the Logan Tabernacle and the Logan Temple. And he had been involved in a number of, he taught school, he had a mercantile establishment, he did farming and ranching, and so he was really kind of a jack of all trades.
Almost sounds like a Canadian Brigham Young to me, the way he was able to lead and build.
Yeah, and that's how I've come to learn and appreciate Charles Card. He was that leader that led the saints up there, and similar to what Brigham Young did. Obviously, they didn't travel as far or as long, but the work that he did in establishing not only Cardston but their surrounding communities is very similar to what Brigham Young did in the Intermountain West.
And so Charles Card's wife, named Zina, what was her impressions of this place that she was, taken to?
Well, I'm just thrilled with Zina. She was Brigham Young's daughter by his wife, Diantha Huntington, and had been raised in his home and had all the cultural refinements, and so it was a challenge for her, but she was determined to be a good wife. I have an excerpt from an interview she did with the Lethbridge Herald some 30 years after they came, if you'd like me to read that. She says, on June 3rd of the memorable year 1889, our small band of settlers drove down the east side of the hill leading to Lee's Creek, a small river or large creek, in the middle of a heavy rain. We camped in the mud, pitched our tents, and made fires. On our arrival, the unloading began. Little Wilfred Wolf gazed hopelessly around. His patient mother explained that this was home. Home, he said with a sob, where are the houses? And we all echoed where. In the morning, snow covered all nature, this on the 14th of June. When arriving here on the banks of the St. Mary's River, which was booming at the time with spring freshets, we were met by several of the mounted police who kindly volunteered their assistance in crossing that dangerous stream. So Mr. Cotter plunged boldly in and led the way through the raging torrent, and all arrived on the other side in peace and safety. Thus began the life of our people in their adopted country.
So they eventually settled and probably did get houses.
They moved into homes by September. They lived in tents from June to September, and then the men had constructed log homes.
Once they got settled in, I can imagine that probably local officials or national officials would want to see what was going on with this community. Did they have any visitors?
Lots and lots and lots of visitors. That little cabin that they built, which started out as 15 square feet, housed government officials, church officials, new settlers. It was a busy place, became the hearth of the settlement, really.
Now, do you have a story, a Christmas story that you'd like to share with us, Sister?
Well,
Peter?
they got together immediately. They moved into their cabins in September, and the women started immediately, and this is an excerpt from the journals of Jane and Zina Wolf. At appointed times, the women settlers met at Aunt Zina's to make Christmas stockings of mosquito netting elaborately finished by needle with red or green yarn. There was corn to be popped and strung for tree trimming, as well as colored paper chains. There were old hand-knitted socks to be unraveled and wound into firm round balls for the boys. Each ball was marked like the sections of an orange and stitched with fine chain stitching in varied colors of brown, yellow, and red. Well-dressed rag dolls were made for the small girls. Pretty work bags, aprons, or fancy pin cushions were made for the teenagers. The men, who had already turned out homemade furniture, lent a hand at making doll beds and cradles, small tables and stools. Socks were knit for husbands and sons. Old LeGrand Robinson officiated as a well-disguised Santa Claus. The significant thing about this first Christmas party to me is that they were determined to have a community and to offer to their children as much as they could of the comforts of home and the traditions that were significant to them as they established this new community.
Yeah, I don't know what maybe the kids were expecting, but it does sound like they probably did
Probably
very
as
well.
good as they would have gotten in Utah.
We're visiting today with Sister Sandra Petrie, Brady Winslow, and Gary Boatwright of the Church History Department on our Legacy program, and we're discussing the settlement of southern Alberta, Canada. Let's talk about some of the other communities that sprung up as a result of the Latter-day Saints showing up.
Okay. Well, there was a total, I believe, 18 or 19 settlements which the Latter-day Saints settled in southern Alberta. But the primary ones, or the ones that are still known today, is Cardston, of course, which we've talked a little bit about, but also McGrath, Raymond, and Sterling. And these latter three communities really have their founding tied to irrigation in the area. As we mentioned earlier, Charles Card and the group of pioneers who went up there in the late 1880s were able to show that irrigation could be successful in this area. And that caught the attention of Canadian officials and also businessmen. And a couple of those businessmen, one of them, Charles McGrath, befriended Card. They began discussing about the possibility of having a large irrigation system in the area, which would enable thousands and thousands of acres of land to be irrigated and then hopefully bring in more people to settle the area. And because Mr. McGrath knew of the Latter-day Saints' success in irrigation, he really wanted Latter-day Saints to be the ones who would come work on the canal and settle these communities. And so in July of 1898, the Alberta Irrigation Company entered a contract with the First Presidency of the Church. And the contract called for the creation of about a 60-mile canal between the area of Cardston and Lethbridge, and then also the settlement of two communities. And these two communities were to have 250 people each by the end of the year 1899. And Charles Card was very excited about this, about the possibility of more settlers coming to the area. He traveled through Utah trying to recruit people. They wrote articles in the Desert News explaining the benefits of southern Alberta. But unfortunately, not many people heeded the call or grasped the excitement that Charles Card was trying to share. And so the First Presidency of the Church was concerned that they wouldn't be able to fulfill their end of the project. And so they began to call people to settle in southern Alberta. And some of these calls were to go up there and live for the remainder of their lives. Others were called up there just to complete the work and then come back. But they began calling people in the spring of 1899. When someone received a call, most of them left within a matter of weeks. And one of those who received a call was Theodore Brandley. He received the call from President Wilford Woodruff, and at the time he was a successful businessman in Richfield, Utah. He had a furniture store. He was the bishop down there. He was also the mayor. And he received this call, but having never turned down a call before, especially from the prophet, there was no question in his mind that he would go to southern Alberta. One of the benefits of the settlements up there was a railroad station in Sterling. It was the only thing within miles, but it was very beneficial for the saints who were called to go up there. Brandley, as well as hundreds of others, settled the area, and within, again, following the Mormon settlement pattern, they unloaded the trains, got their belongings together, and immediately went about building a community. And Charles Card had made preparations for the settlers. He had lumber brought in so they could immediately begin building homes. The town sites had been surveyed previously, and so they were able to literally walk off the train and begin building a new life in southern Alberta. And so the two towns that were established was, of course, Sterling, and then McGrath, which was named after Charles McGrath, who was one of the proponents of the irrigation works.
So another community named Raymond came into life.
Yes, it did.
Brady, you want to tell us about that?
Of course. The establishment of Raymond is a little different from Sterling and McGrath because it wasn't the people that went up there and established the community weren't actually called on missions. They actually went up there because of the land that was available, and that's because of Jesse Knight and his willingness to purchase land up there. So in 1900, he was approached by Charles A. McGrath and John W. Taylor, who was an apostle of the church, and they wanted to interest Knight in purchasing land in southern Alberta. So in January of 1901, Jesse Knight sent two of his sons, Raymond and William, up to Canada to look at the land. And when they returned, they reported favorably about the land, and subsequently Jesse Knight purchased 30,000 acres of land. A few months later, Jesse Knight personally went to southern Alberta to check out the land that he had purchased, and by July of that year, he entered into a contract with the Canadian Northwest Irrigation Company and the Alberta Railway and Irrigation Company to purchase 226,000 more acres of land. And he also agreed to build a sugar beet factory, have it operating by the fall of 1903, and he also agreed that the factory would operate for 12 years. So a few months later, in August, there was a dedication. They dedicated a site for the sugar factory as well as for a new settlement called Raymond after Jesse Knight's oldest son, Raymond. The factory operated for several years, and the first few years were profitable. It was successful, but in subsequent years, they ran into problems such as adverse weather, as well as they couldn't raise enough sugar beets or grow enough sugar beets to make the factory productable, and therefore it closed down by 1916.
So it didn't quite make the 12-year agreement?
No, it did not. I think it missed the agreement by a few months, actually.
So, yeah, sugar beets were something Utahns knew how to do, but evidently the land was different enough that it didn't quite work out the same.
Yes, and I think one reason is because of the growing season. Obviously, it's colder in southern Alberta, and so the growing season was shorter.
But, if you go back to irrigation, that's really what caused Raymond to be established as well. But it was more of a business opportunity, rather than saints fulfilling a call from the prophet. But the way that the community was settled, if you look at a map of Raymond, you can tell it's a Latter-day Saint town. Wide streets,
sure,
running north and south, square blocks. So the influence of the church was still very heavy in the settlement of Raymond.
So tell me what this area, these towns are doing look like today.
Well, in fact, I'm the only one who's been there out of the three of us, so I guess it falls to me. These are very small villages, beautiful little communities. Again, in fact, when my wife and we went up there last spring, and as we were driving through one of the communities, my wife said, I feel like we're in Hooper, Utah, square blocks and everything. But out of all the communities that the Saints established, really there are only 4 that are really remaining. I shouldn't say that, 4 substantial communities that are remaining. Those, of course, being Cardston, McGrath, Raymond, and Sterling. And these communities are populated by very faithful Latter-day Saints. You drive through these small communities, and there are multiple Latter-day Saint buildings with multiple wards in them. And their activity rate up there is just, it's unbelievable how active and these members are up there. But as you drive through the settlements, you can definitely see the influence of Charles Card and these early pioneers on the landscape today. And in fact, much of their work has been celebrated by the Canadian government. The whole village of Sterling is a National Historic Site, and that is because it's the best example of a Mormon agricultural community. And, so for us to have a whole community as a National Historic Site is amazing. Also, the canals up there, the remnants of the canals in McGrath, it's a National Historic Site, and the communities have built a trail and a park around this, celebrating their early history. And then, of course, in Cardston, we have the temple and the Charles and Zina Card home in Cardston, which is still there. And one of the things that we are doing, we were approached by a number of members up there to share the history of the church, and so we will be creating 4 markers, which will be placed in June of this year, 2012, one in each of these communities, celebrating the history. In McGrath and Sterling, we're just celebrating the general history. And Raymond, in fact, I'll let Brady talk about what we're doing in Raymond. But then in Cardston, we'll have a marker in front of the Card home as well. But Brady, why don't you?
The marker in Raymond celebrates 2 unique church buildings that the members used up there. The first was a school building that was built in 1903 that the local school district used, and then later they rented that building to the Raymond Second Ward. The Raymond Second Ward actually purchased the building 2 years later, so it's this old school building that they converted into a chapel. And then several years later, they outgrew that building, and they were authorized to be able to build a new building. And so the second building that the marker talks about is it's a very unique building. It has a central rotunda and then 3 different wings. One of the wings was the chapel. One was an amusement hall, or what's similar to our cultural halls today. And then the third wing had classrooms and offices. And the building was actually modeled after a building that's in Provo, Utah, similar design, the central rotunda with the 3 wings, that was built or designed by the architects Howard W. Burton and Hiram C. Pope, who are also the 2 architects that designed the Cardston Temple.
Excellent. I open this question up to all of you, and I'm just wondering what were some of the significant, perhaps different challenges and blessings about settling southern Alberta to these early saints as opposed to maybe some of the other places that saints went?
Right now I'm in the middle of preparing a paper on Theodore Branley and the settlement of Sterling. And I think one of the first differences is for the group that went up to, because of the irrigation works, the travel time and travel itself was much easier. I mean, pretty much just had to somehow get themselves and their belongings to Salt Lake, and then from there they took a train, which pretty much dropped them off at the front door. So obviously they didn't have the 1,000 miles of pulling a wagon or even a hand cart across the plains. The second thing is they had a little bit more conveniences. Lethbridge was about 40 miles away. Lethbridge was an established community. They could get materials and supplies and food from there. But I think the one thing, or one of many things that is similar, but the most prominent in my mind is the faith that these saints had. They received a call from a prophet of God, and they left their homes. They left, much of their belongings. In many cases, they left some members of their family, and they moved up to the open plains where there was literally nothing, and they built a community from the bottom up. And many of those who settled the area stayed there. And you can go up there today, and the names of these people we've talked about, their names are still up there. The descendants are still living in these communities. And they truly love and honor their pioneer heritage. And I think these people, they deserve to be called pioneers, just in the same way that, the early saints of 1847 are called pioneers, because they faithfully fulfilled a calling with faith and direction and inspiration. They built a Latter-day Saint community, which now is anchored by a temple, and one of the most beautiful temples we have. And the lives of these early pioneers are exemplified in the lives of the members of the church up there. As I mentioned before, these are some of the most faithful, diligent, and kind members of the church found throughout the world. And, there's a reason why these small communities have so many chapels, because there's so many active, faithful Latter-day Saints. And so, it truly is a pioneer story, and I think it's one that many members of the church are not aware of. But there's, I can find great hope and inspiration, and the examples of these people are their lives. We can learn many things from their lives, just as we can of the pioneers who came across the plains.
Good. Thank you very much. This has been very enjoyable. Thanks for your comments today. We've been discussing the early settlements of southern Alberta, Canada on Legacy with Brady Winslow, Gary Boatwright, and Sister Sandra Petrie, all from the Church History Department. I'm Nathan Wright, and this is the Mormon Channel, a media arm of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints.